And we're on air now.
Yay.
So, yeah, welcome. Yeah, welcome. Should be fun. Let's see, who all is in the chat room? Just one person active. All right. Talk to them. Yeah. You're strangely silent right now, Matt.
Is that weird
It is a little weird. It's kind
for
of
me?
yeah, it's strange for you to not say anything at all. Do you see my small rainbow of elephants going on over
I
here?
do. That's pretty.
It's pretty.
You got like the Roy G. Biv of.
Yeah, pretty close to it. It is kind of in that order, actually.
I know. That's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah. I wonder if I did that purposely.
I would imagine you did.
I did. I have to admit, I really did.
I know.
Oh, good. I see that Code Rabbi has joined the
Joined the
channel,
heckle?
so he must have gotten his cider run. Kind of waiting for someone to actually confirm that they can hear us.
Hear us? Okay.
Yeah.
Can
It's
you,
being
can you
delivered.
guys hear us?
Yeah, could someone say, hey, we can actually hear you? See, I don't think anyone can hear us. Oh, it says we have 2 viewers. That's nice. Of course, what if it's really delayed by... We... What did you type? Yeah. That's great.
No, I gotta get the.
Hey, we can actually us.
Okay,
All right,
cool.
we sound good, and there's a delay. All right, cool.
That's perfect. So
I
we can
guess we
like
can
edit
roll.
it if I say something.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Yeah, well, I'll edit. I always edit all this front nonsense
Yeah,
out.
no, I know. I mean, like the delay. Like I'm thinking like TV.
Oh yeah.
Like if I say you mother, and they can like put feather in or something.
Yeah. Yeah, because we
Okay.
have that technology here on Google Plus.
Probably in the Hangout toolbar.
It probably is in some obscure plugin or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna get this thing started so we don't
Let's get rolling.
talk too much before we actually want to talk. All right. Welcome to the Lucy Couple Podcast, episode 11. Episode 11. I learned it good. I think that's what we're calling it. That was Matt's
Yeah.
suggestion. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot for that, Matt. How's it going tonight, buddy?
Oh, it's going okay. Long day, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So my day was awesome. Thanks for asking.
Oh yeah, how was your day?
Yeah, it was good. Thanks, buddy. So I learned it goodly. It is kind of it was a topic that I wanted to do because I feel like a lot of times I spend time teaching people subjects or people asking me questions about random things, and when I was trying to learn them, I was given bad advice on how to learn them, or other people are given bad advice today, like how to learn stuff. And so I wanted to talk about just some experiences with trying to learn things, and then how that all shakes down, and possibly give some insight into how I think we should be doing this stuff, or how we think that we should be doing stuff. So the first subject that I think is, I don't want to say taught incorrectly, but the first subject that has problems with, or that I see a lot of problems with, is object-oriented programming. So
No.
yeah. So how did you learn object-oriented programming, Matt?
I haven't yet. No.
That's actually a good answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's kind of my like. I'm always learning answer. No, honestly, like I had to pick it up. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to rehash a little bit. But when I first started out, I was in a company where I was a sole developer, yada yada yada. It was kind of in the heyday of PHP 4, so didn't really do much object-oriented programming until, for my job anyway, until about a couple years ago. And honestly, I learned it. I read a lot of books. I practiced a lot. Um, I mean, even now, I still do a lot of those same things. I think that's, for me, that's one of the goals of open source projects that I do, or side projects that I do, is to try to make them um, clean and make sense, and kind of continue to hammer home some of those concepts. Um, Code reusability and cleanliness and single responsibility and all that kind of fun stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I wish I had like a really cool story of when it all clicked. I think for me, it's kind of just clicking every day, a little bit more and a little bit more. So, yeah, did it the old-fashioned way with some elbow grease.
Some hard work and dedication. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a common experience. And when I first started programming, I was kind of self-taught, and I was just picking up a book which was all, I was learning C at the time.
Sweet.
And obviously, well, there was no object-oriented programming, or not in the book that I was reading anyway. They didn't talk about any of these concepts. It was all just, well, typical procedural, basic C level or C functions and stuff like that you would write. So
C code has a reputation for being very beautiful to look at.
Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous. It's much better than Ruby, that's for sure.
Whoa.
But did you see that? Did you see that that post about languages if they were weapons? And
I did.
yeah, I think the Ruby one was like it's people only use it because it's pretty to look at, essentially. Like it's
Yeah.
it's like this beautiful Ruby encrusted whatever. I thought that was kind of funny because Ruby is a very expressive language. Anyway, I digress. So, I taught myself just basic programming and learn that stuff, and then eventually I picked up some different languages. I picked up C++ and tried to do that self-taught, and that was a cluster of fun, we'll call it. And
Did you say fun?
cluster of fun, yes. We're keeping this
okay.
PG, man.
Okay.
And then I picked up Java in school, which that was where the first experience with object-oriented came into play, like really trying to understand it. And so the classical examples came out of, here, I'm going to teach you object-oriented programming. So let's pretend that we're making a program that deals with the zoo. And so we've got animals, and then those, a pig is an animal, or just like that type of teaching. And it was like such basic examples, and then from there it was like, now let's write a program that does something significantly more complex than creating a dog that can bark and a pig that can oink, right? And so I feel like I see that a lot in different levels of teaching people things, and that's kind of where I have an issue with the way that we often give people information or try to teach them new topics. Like, I guess for me, the canonical example would be around design patterns, right? So you've got someone that's kind of gone through and basically understands object-oriented programming and maybe has some inkling of the idea of what it is to write better code, and they're like, I heard about or I read about design patterns, so I want to learn about them. So can you help me learn about these things? You're like, sure, I can. Go pick up the Gang of Four book and read it, front to back, cover to cover, and then you'll know all there is to know about design patterns. And I see this advice all over the place, and it's it could be a different book, it could be Gang of Four, it could be Head First is another popular one where it kind of walks through, and the problem with that is that as a teaching method or teaching mechanism is quite terrible, because you end up with people who are taking something and reading that and then reading some blog post somewhere where someone's like, here's how you apply a factory, and then like, you know what I need to do in my code? I need to write factories everywhere. or I need to do
Or
I need to
factories.
yeah, I need to make factories that are abstract, which make other abstract factories to make more factories. Um, that's
Industrial
terrible.
Revolution is what I
I'm
call
talking
that.
about Java, of course, um, but so that's kind of the problem is you can see a misapplication of concepts, and the fault isn't on whoever was trying to learn something. The fault is on whoever taught them that, right? Like
Yeah.
it's patterns, and then it's even basic concepts like trying to learn object-oriented programming, and you teach people about inheritance, and then ultimately you tell them that you should favor composition over inheritance, but you don't tell people why. You don't like most beginner object-oriented classes and courses and books and everything else start with inheritance as the example of object-oriented programming, and
Yeah.
then later say, but really, in practice, it's better to favor composition because this is easier to maintain. It's better, but we're not going to tell you why. We're just going to tell you that it's better, and then hope for the best. And so, what do you end up with? You end up with a bunch of code that someone has tried to quote unquote favor composition, but they ended up writing a bunch of uh, hierarchical code, or they've got problems with duplication because they were just trying to apply some random information that they read on a blog post and
Yeah.
ended up with this mess. And so I think we could fix that as people who are mentoring and teaching younger developers, or I don't want to say younger in terms of age, but younger in development years,
Experience. Yeah.
if that makes sense. But
It
teaching
doesn't.
them
But keep on.
in a different way. It makes plenty of sense. But you got it immediately. Shut up. Um, yeah, so I think that's like my whole point is just how do we teach the progression? So yeah, I don't know. So what is your take on it? What is one thing that you see that we teach wrong or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you touched on a pretty good one with design patterns. I'm not going to argue their usefulness. I think they are useful. I think they can be useful. But I think that there's been such a prominence put on them. I think what ends up happening a lot of times, because now, kind of the common theme is, and I've had this in interviews and I've had this with talking to people, is, you're in an interview and, well, do you know design patterns? Like, uh, at the time I didn't. I was like, yeah, I mean, I know a couple, but I'm not, and I think what happens is the concepts behind those design patterns never really get taught that well. So you start to learn what an adapter is, and what a factory is, and maybe what a facade is, and you knew that was coming.
I
Um,
know.
and then you start to say, okay, well, how can I put all of these pieces into my code, right?
Yeah.
I know these awesome little techniques for doing certain things. How can I make everything do these, fit into this block of code? And I don't think that's helpful. I mean, until you have a good grasp of composition, until you have a good grasp of designing by contract, and you can kind of forget all the inheritance stuff that like everyone ever tried to teach you. A dog is a type of animal, and it can speak, and here's how it speaks. Like,
It barks. Yeah.
it barks. What does a
Awesome.
fish say? Well, a fish doesn't speak, so it's not an animal. No, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that is one area where it's, it because it's the people that understand it. It's really easy. Oh, okay, yeah, design by contract. Okay, I understand that. I can do that. Makes sense. I can use abstract classes or interfaces or whatever, and make all my code do this. But I know I've written code in the past, and I'm sure you have, and I'm sure everyone that's listening at some point has, where you're like design by contract. you don't really know how to design it, so your contract ends up being gigantic.
Yeah.
And then you find out about 5 classes in that, wow, a lot of this stuff is really contrived. I've got a lot of methods that I've implemented in multiple classes that are, completely empty implementations. They're just there. And, I mean, I think if that was taught first, if designing by contract and how to kind of figure out what your contract is for what you're trying to do and how to group things together into, those kind of types of categories or interfaces or whatever. I mean, I think learning design patterns at that point would be really trivial. But what ends up happening is, there's a lot of good, a lot of people that know a lot of really vast amounts of information about design patterns, and they teach it well. I guess my point would be that I don't know that teaching young developers using your previous definition, uh, design patterns right off the bat is really doing them any good.
It's also not doing you any good.
Me any good how?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't do you any good to teach a younger, experience-wise developer design patterns, because then you'll end up with code that has 50,000 design patterns
Right.
it doesn't need.
Design patterns for the sake of design patterns. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It almost seems like to me you should learn design patterns like when you when you can recognize that you actually need one. The way it's taught is like, here's design patterns, learn these and you'll be a genius. And
yeah, I think one of the best ways for teaching design patterns is setting up some sort of so you're not actually teaching people from name down to implementation. What you're doing is you're setting up scenarios where something could use, for example, you used an adapter earlier, so you could use an adapter to deal with something, deal with some particular problem that you have. So you get them to code a solution to it, and then of course this only works for people with some experience, obviously, but
right. Well, you see, you automatically, by doing that, like the people that probably need the most teaching. When you start with design patterns, you cut all those people almost completely out.
Well, yeah, and that's why what you're saying makes sense. Is you shouldn't be teaching that early on. So I'm saying, like, the better way is once you get someone that's ready for that, they can already code a solution to something, and you give them an example where it would be a good application of an adapter pattern, for example, and then you say, here, solve this particular problem, and then they will solve it for whatever you gave them, and then you say, all right, cool, now I need to throw this new requirement in, which kind of gives you that here's where an adapter would have been useful to write, and then explain to them like what they did, and then how they can now see, because they've got this additional requirement, that hey, this would have been a good application of writing this type of code. And then after that, once they figure that out and written the code, then say, by the way, this thing is called the adapter pattern. And then that's when you research, that's when you learn the different patterns. Like learning by example, where you've actually written the code and figured out or developed the pattern internally, I think is more useful. Because what I see a lot of times is, hey, this is a point where I know that a particular pattern works or could work, so I'm going to write it to the book, like by the book here in this code, and you end up with something you're like, well, you don't really need all of that. Like you could borrow the concept of, and a big one is observers. You could borrow the concept of that, but you don't have to take a textbook, let me go Google observer pattern in PHP and copy this code, and there I've got this done. Like I think
that's always a good way to get things done. Copy
it
code
is
from Google.
Well, better if it's on Stack Overflow. That is
yes, that's so much better.
Yeah. So it's like a big, I think, step that would be useful for anyone who's ever been asked the question, hey, can you teach me about design patterns, is spend a little bit of time, if you're going to commit to doing it, to developing some examples that will help you push that person to here's why and how design patterns work, and then I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to do that for every single design pattern ever. Like that's a
Right.
huge commitment.
Right.
But start with a couple of them, and then I think from that basic repetition of learning or of doing a single design pattern or a couple of design patterns, they'll start to see, okay, now I can go read or I can go look at Gang of Four and look at the different patterns, and then I'll be able to see how these fit into my code or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I this thought just kind of came to me as I was sitting here nodding in agreement with everything that you just said. That I think we need to maybe like start disagreeing more.
All right.
I'm afraid maybe we're getting boring or something.
Okay. So what do you want to disagree with?
I don't know. Let's find something.
Say something disagreeable.
Give me time. I will.
Quick,
No,
go.
no,
Yeah,
no.
so,
But I agree though. I agree with what you're saying, which was the point of my whole little diatribe there. Yeah, I think it's just it almost seems to me, and I don't mean this as offense to anybody who teaches this stuff. I'm sure this isn't the case, but it almost seems to me like it's taught in a way that doesn't take up a whole lot of time of the person teaching it. Almost like it's packaged and kind of like, well, okay, well, if I can teach design patterns, that's kind of a finite set of patterns, and they're defined, and I can teach them, and then when I teach design patterns, then everyone's going to know how to object orient.
Yeah.
And
they can then write their own framework.
yeah, called
and
pattern,
rule the word.
PH pattern.
Yeah, a PH pattern. Yeah. No, something you said earlier kind of made me think of something that I find interesting. You were talking about interviews and such, and if I were to go out tomorrow, not saying that I am, but if I were to go out tomorrow and interview, and someone asked me in a serious way, do you know anything about design patterns? I said yes. They said, oh, can you name me your 5 favorite patterns? I'm pretty sure I would get up and walk out of the room.
I would make up 5.
I've heard, yeah, like, oh, you never heard of the, I don't know, like, I have to come
sarsaparilla pattern?
The sarsaparilla pattern.
It's my all-time favorite.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, I get, naming is important. I'm not going to argue that naming is not important, because it is.
It's not.
If you were to name something that's not really a particular pattern, name it in that way, you could cause some problems for.
Really, dude?
Twitter especially, but so I'm not saying that that it's not important to understand what you're doing, or the names for what you're doing, because that is how we communicate as developers. Like if I'm talking to somebody and I'm like, oh yeah, I was writing this thing, and someone's gonna say, oh yeah, well obviously that is an adapter. Like that's what it is. Like that's how you explain what something is. Or if you were talking about patterns in how you deal with databases, people might say, so was it more data mapper or was it more table gateway? Like there's actual names for things, and they can communicate a lot of information in a few words. So I do think it is important to learn the names, but I don't think that starting out, your first foray into design patterns, it doesn't really matter if you call them, the banana pattern or whatever. Just as long, just learning
the banana hammock.
The banana hammock pattern. It's learning the application of them rather than the names of them. And I think this is kind of evidenced in the IRC channel, which if you're listening to this live, you should definitely join us there.
Yeah,
Freenode, loosely coupled.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely join us there. But in there, they're talking about in computer science education, the teachers taught them mechanics of design patterns without discussing the whys or the trade-offs. So that's kind of I think what is missing in in a lot of teaching somebody something, which I can draw on another example. So we've kind of kicked design patterns to death right now, but testing
Let's kick it
is
one more
another. Yeah, okay. But testing is definitely another one where people need to understand why. And so, like, the big point there would be you start talking to somebody and they're like, I want to write tests. And you're like, okay, cool. And they're like, I want to write unit tests because I heard that unit tests are the best. Some
time.
guy who has, the name Grumpy Programmer or whatever said that I should do these things. And you're like, okay, so why? Like, why do you want to, or why do you think that's the best way to do it? They're like, oh, because that's the easy way to find bugs. You're like, okay, so the mechanics of how you do it is pretty simple. Like, it's very easy to teach somebody how to write tests.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to teach people why you have to do certain things. Like, trying to teach people why you have to separate and inject dependencies and all of that stuff, all of the stuff that you do or you need to do for testing, like understanding that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So I think that's something that's important as people who are venturing into the education front or trying to teach other people things in your blog post or whatever. Focus less on the how necessarily, focus a little more on the why, or maybe balance it a little better. But
well, I think anytime you write code, whether it's code that's going into an application or you're writing tests or whatever it is, I mean, that should always be your goal, is to understand, why are we solving this problem? What problem are we solving it? And then leave the how. The how is kind of more like, I don't know if iterative is the right word, but it comes along more slowly, right? You figure out, okay, well, why are we solving this problem? What is the problem? And then if you get too caught up on the how, you start solving the problem, the how, right then and there, and then you find out that your problem has shifted or you didn't understand your problem correctly. So I think anytime you can understand what with tests, that's a really great question to ask people is, why do you test or why do you want to test? And some people, I think, are guilted into it or feel like, hey, I should test because that's the right thing to do. And for the record, it is. But yeah, I mean, if you don't know, like, especially if you're not on a side project, if you're at your day job and you're like, hey, I really want to introduce testing, you had better know exactly why you want to do it and be able to explain exactly why. Because, and we've talked about this before, most places aren't crazy excited about it. So,
yeah, well,
but that's the battle that Chris fights a lot. He fights a lot more actively and a lot more grumpily than I do. Not sure if grumpily is a word, but it is now. There, you guys just
podcast.
You guys just learned it, a new word. He fights it all the time, like trying to convince people to test and trying to get them to understand why and how. But the why is always like, well, it takes more time, it costs more money. We don't get to move from feature to feature as quickly because we're spending more time writing tests, and Chris always likes to say things like, hey, I get to go home at 5 o'clock. That's my goal. Is I want to work my work day and then leave knowing that everything's in good shape because I can prove it and verify it. And I mean, in my mind, that's a really good argument, but I mean, I guess it must not be for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really see for, testing. It takes a while for it to click that it is not just something. It's not just extra work, and usually it takes. Sadly, it takes something where you actually need the tests, or where the tests are extremely helpful. So a pretty bad production bug or something to that effect, where you didn't write the correct test, or you didn't foresee how how your code would respond in certain environments or certain situations, and so you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have test coverage around given certain data or whatever. So you have some big problem, and then you can leverage the test to actually help you figure out how that happened. And I think
Yep.
that's when it clicks for a lot of people is when they see, oh wait, so writing the test wasn't just a bunch of extra work. It is actually a tool that I can use in the future. And so I
Yep.
think that's the big thing that you're fighting with, or that's the big thing that people are fighting when they're trying to advocate for testing to a wide audience is you're playing against people's need for instant gratification or instant, oh wow, these tests they really saved my life,
Right.
and you're really not going to get that unless you can, like, you're not going to get that aha moment with people who are new to it or even adverse to it,
Right.
um, unless you really sell them on the idea of using tests for design purposes, which that's
Right.
a whole different ballgame. But it takes a lot of discipline for someone to be able to use tests for design. So
Right.
teaching that to beginners is difficult. So that's
Well,
why the
I think it's kind of the same thing though. I think you run into, and I'm going to go back to design patterns here just one more time. Um, with all the information that we have at our fingertips, if we've been doing this 30 years ago, not this, because I don't think uh, podcasts existed 30 years ago, but
we could have
um,
started them
we could have been the trailblazers. Um, I was born 31 years ago, so I
a
wouldn't have done
billion
it.
years.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is I, because like you have Google at your fingertips, you have Stack Overflow, you have all these resources that are kind of used to give you answers to kind of semi-specific problems really, really fast. I think the tendency is to treat learning big, huge, like computer science concepts in that same way. And I think that's why the design pattern stuff is so appealing. Because hey, I don't have to sit down and take 2 semesters of uh, computer science theory. I can learn these design patterns and have enough under my belt to kind of be you know comfortable with where I'm at. And I think the same is with testing, and that's exactly what you just said about kind of that instant gratification. Like, yeah, tests pay off, and we want our tests to pay off. And if we're not seeing that payoff like immediately, are we doing it wrong? Are we doing something wrong? No, you just were stupid for putting it off so long. That's the only thing
No,
you did wrong was you put it off so long.
you're probably doing it wrong.
Well, I am, but
Not you personally. I mean anyone. Like
yeah. Well,
that's
I think
that is the one thing
that's the
I've
thing.
learned.
It's so easy to overcomplicate it. Like I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who will write a test and then they'll convince themselves that they did it wrong because it was too easy. Like
Yeah.
there's got to be more to it than that. Like
Well, there is. There's like 50 other tests that you need to write, but it's fine
oh
if certain
right.
ones are easy to
But
write.
when you're just starting with someone and they're like, here, write a test for fizz buzz. God, I hate that example.
Write a test for ditch digging.
Yeah, no, write a test for anything. Like any simple little method. Write a test for it. And you end up like calling it and then asserting stuff and passing it different endpoints and then asserting different stuff. And it's really like conceptually not that hard, but we've kind of like somewhere along the line we as a industry or a whatever you want to call it have kind of made this notion that testing is really really hard and takes like if you get it done somehow you did it wrong because it's too easy.
Yeah, I get that, and I think that's also a very good point about how we teach and what we teach. So in testing, typically, if you were to go to a presentation or something like that on unit testing, or on beginning testing, you would see something like the your favorite FizzBuzz example, or you'd see
Right.
the bowling example, or you'd see the calculator example, or something to that effect, which is showing people here is the simple mechanics of how you go about writing a test. Like, you know that you need to add two numbers together, and you have this method. You're going to make this method called add, so you go here and do this, and inevitably the question comes up towards the end of the presentation or whatever. That's great in this example, like, showing me the mechanics of how that goes is great, but I've got this app that has 50,000 dependencies that are being pulled in, and I've got this huge mess. How do I actually test that? And I think that's another point where how we, or I guess the attention that is often paid in traditional learning environments. So if I were to say what 90%, I would say 90% of developers don't have any outside education of their, like, outside of their job, other than just reading blog posts or like hearing things from other people. Like, maybe they do that, maybe they don't. And then 10% are the people who go to conferences or whatever, and then a smaller number of that would go to trainings and that sort of thing, right? So you've got a very small fraction of people that are going to in-depth training. So as a whole, we end up teaching very simplistic examples because that's all you can actually do as a presenter in an hour-long talk. All you can do is present small digestible examples. And so then we just kind of leave people, or people are then left to extrapolate and take that small concept and apply it elsewhere. So that's where I think projects like PHP mentoring and there's like I think there's a couple others that I guess push people towards developing the relationships of learning, like the relationship with learning, as opposed to just, hey, I'm going to go read a book and then do that. So this is one of the reasons why I started Dev Book Club, was to have people together that were reading a book. So it is doing a traditional thing. Like, we could read Gang of Four if we wanted to. We could read design patterns. Well, it's already been done, but we could do that and go through, and as we're reading it, then we're discussing it and taking what we're trying to learn and applying it to different problems. We've got specific things that everyone brings, and so I think we have to find a way as a general community to improve how our relationship with learning is going.
Well, the thing I think that makes it difficult, and again, and I don't say this or anything that I've said to this point to disparage anyone that's teaching or trying to teach. I think it's I think that's a great thing that there's people out there that are willing to share what they know about design patterns and testing and APIs and whatever else. The problem becomes that the problem space that people are in, whatever they're trying to solve problems for, is so different. Even people in the same space are solving problems a different way, or have different requirements on how to solve the problems, and that's why I think it's so. That's why I don't think like teaching design patterns. I think teaching inheritance first is probably far worse than teaching design patterns first.
Probably.
Maybe not far worse. Maybe a little worse. Some worse. And it's like making that switch over into your head, and let's say you're just getting into the community, and you're like, man, there's all these people that are really willing to help, and really willing to help me kind of like take that next step in my career and learn a bunch of new stuff. They probably have problems at work that they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
That they're trying to get as much information as they can, and bring that directly back into the workplace. Like, oh, okay, so if you teach inheritance first, right, people are going to go back, and if they didn't pick up anything, or that was all the talk really covered, or whatever, people are going to go back and, you're going to have Inception, or you're going to have, a God class, or you're going to have this really kind of convoluted architecture in your application because, oh yeah, well I learned about inheritance and that's way easier than what I was doing. So I'm just gonna do that until I learn something different, and then by the time they've learned, oh hey, you know what, I can use an interface, make this a little bit cleaner, segregate some of this stuff, not make it a total nightmare to work with. It's usually too late. You've already created this monster of a cascading staircase to the bowels of hell, and 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 at that point, an interface isn't going to save you.
Yeah, that's true, and that's another topic that I think is. You mentioned this earlier, but the whole design by contract and people end up with giant contracts. They end up with this giant monstrosity of
like you need a lawyer to read it.
Yeah. and I think that's because that's another topic that is taught poorly. It's often just, hey, you want to design by contract, so you need an interface that collects all the methods that you're going to put on this class. So you're not actually really thinking about how objects interact. You're thinking about how they're structured. And I think that's kind of the key to object-oriented programming or teaching object-oriented programming is teaching about interactions of things as opposed to structure. Like structure is great, and as programmers we're kind of drawn to the idea of structure just because that's what we do. Like we take problems and we structure it into procedures for a computer to run. But what you're really aiming for in the design by contract concept is designing something that fulfills certain roles. Like that's the point.
Right.
Like you're wanting to design contracts around how things communicate outside of themselves or with with the outside world. And that I think is where the difference is if you teach somebody design by contract means create an interface that you put all the same crappy methods that you were going to put in this class just on an interface now. So now you can make more of these behemoths that run around.
That's the cascading staircase to hell.
Yeah, I think that is a poor way to teach it, as opposed to saying, okay, here's how we look at we've got these two concepts and we need them to interact together. What are they doing and why? Like ask the question. Like this comes up a lot, I think, in this discussion, but the question why is a very powerful one. Like, and not to be like the 2-year-old that's asking why, but you have to really ask yourself why. Why do I need this particular object, or why does this behavior fit here, and does it even fit here? And those questions, when you start asking yourself and really thinking about where you're putting things and why you're putting them where you are, that's when you start to see the bigger picture, start to understand, and start to need design patterns and tools that allow you to see the bigger picture.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. From being someone who learned a lot of this stuff not that long ago, from my 4 years of nonstop awful PHP4 procedural stuff.
You're done with that now?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm still doing that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. From there to kind of where I am now, which is still there. No. It's having learned a lot of these concepts and picked up on a lot of these design type things. That was always my biggest frustration, though. I don't know that there's a way to solve it. It's like I see what you're doing for that one example, but I don't know in my mind how to make that work for what I'm doing.
Yeah.
In my specific example, because when I'm learning, I'm looking at everything from okay, well, does this relate to anything I'm doing, or is there any side projects in my mind where maybe we want to structure an application this way, and it's just really hard, I think, when you're fresh like that to get your mind around the concepts instead of just the actual solution. And I don't know that there's a super good way to actually teach that.
Yeah, I think part of that is also on. I mean, it's on the teacher, but it's also on the student, right? Like it's on when you're sitting in something and you're looking at a simplistic example and you're thinking to yourself, where does this fit in what I'm doing? Like, how can I extract this out and use this?
Yeah.
I think that's part of where it's important to, do some homework before you get into something, or don't expect to walk into, let's say PHP mentoring tomorrow and say, hey, I want to learn design patterns. And you're going to get a
Right.
lot of people that say, well, why do you want to learn that? And they say, well, I heard that that's the next step. I learned object-oriented programming, so I know how to make what are we calling it in the chat room? I think we're calling it some sort of I'm missing it now.
You just
Some
call
sort
it a
of
chat
zoo.
room?
Yeah, is that what I said? I don't know the
Mhm.
channel. A zoo simulation, like a zoo simulator.
Like the
So you
Sims for
learned,
zoos?
you learned how to write a zoo simulator with your animals and your cows and whatnot, and then you say, well, now I have to learn how to write abstract factories naturally, so I can make more animals. Um, and so like coming in and just
And that's where
with
babies
the
come from.
coming in with the expectation that that whatever material you're reading is going to apply 100% to whatever you're doing, or
Yeah.
that it's even going to apply 50% is tough. And
Yeah.
an example of that is we've been reading through implementing domain-driven design on the Dev Book Club, which I'm plugging like crazy tonight, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Good on you.
we've been reading through that book, and a lot of times, well, all the examples are in Java, so trying to apply
Yeah.
that outside is sometimes difficult because it leans very heavily on certain ORMs that are available only in Java, or at least not available in any languages that I use, which is Rails, right?
It's the only language you use?
Yeah, just Rails, and it is a language. Yeah. No, it's not. It's not a language. But trying to take that and apply the concepts is difficult. Like it's not something that's easy, and it's not something you're going to get by just listening to somebody ramble about it, or even reading the book. Like reading the book through, just sitting down, in your recliner on an airplane or whatever. Reading the book is not going to get you an understanding of how to apply it. You
Right.
have to do the work. You have to sit there and play with it outside of the specific problem that you're trying to solve, and then also within the problem. So
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of work for both sides of the equation. Like as someone who's teaching or mentoring or leading someone to some sort of concept, you have to do a lot of work to get examples that are digestible and understandable, that illustrate the point you're trying to make. And then on the flip side, as the student, your work kind of starts once you understand the simple example and goes from there. But I think the important step that is often missed is there's a disconnect, and it becomes a passing of the torch concept where you as a teacher say, hey, you should use design patterns, and then you say, here's a book on design patterns, and here's 50 articles that I wrote on design patterns, or that somebody wrote on design patterns. Read them and then use design patterns, and then that's the last interaction that you have.
Right.
that's not how we. That's not how you learn. That's not. I mean, that's not how you teach. If you want to,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the root of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely. I guess I can speak for myself here because I can't say everyone learns the same way that I do, but you should because it's the best. Um,
Well, I mean, you can say it. It would be wrong, but you could totally say
okay.
it.
Yeah, I've never been wrong on this podcast. I'm not going to start now. Anyway, um, yeah, no, I think there's got to be a balance. I think of interaction and kind of like do it yourself. So I agree. Like saying, here's a book of design patterns, read it, and then write design patterns is probably an ineffective way for most people to learn. But I think there is some value in like, hey, here's a book of design patterns. You know, again, just using a general example. Um, Read it, start writing some design patterns, and when you get stuck, give me a call or hit me on IRC or whatever, and we'll talk through why you're stuck, and I'll actually, because I think with any type of learning, and I think this is why I always got bored in school and I wasn't a very good student, um, other than the fact that I like to make jokes all the time, um, was that there was always so much time spent on stuff that I already knew that by the time I got to the new stuff that I actually wanted to learn, I was just a space cadet. I was gone, and I've seen like the super kind of like hand-holding way of teaching things. Like,
Yeah.
okay, type. You start typing out every letter of the class name. Like, okay, animal. Do you know what an animal is? Like,
No, do tell. What is an
yeah,
animal?
it can speak. No, it's it's weird. It's like you go through it so slow that people are kind of like their mind just checks out because they're not like when you're hearing things that you already know, you're not like sharp and attentive and taking it in, and you're not an eager beaver. And when you're hearing something that's new, that's interesting to you, like you tend to be a lot more attentive and a lot more um, a better participant in the learning process.
Yeah.
And so I think and for me, I think that's a good like I'm going to work. I'm going to do what I know how to do until I get stuck. And then when I get stuck, I want to know how to get unstuck, but more importantly, what in my thought process, what in my implementation or in my method for solving this was wrong.
Yeah.
Where did I kind of veer off the path? Um, and and so I mean I think there's a lot to be said on I think like people are smart and allowing them to use what they know to kind of help get themselves there, and then almost just kind of being there as like oh, okay, yeah, you came to this point. This is a really common sticking point. Here's why. Here's some ways you can get around it. Here's some ways um, that are a little bit more effective and extensible and all that kind of stuff compared to what you did. And I think people, because they're learning what they need to know, they're filling in the gaps in their learning. And I think it's rare. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm sure there are people, but I think it's becoming increasingly rare, at least in the PHP community, where you have people that have never interacted with an object before, right? That have never, like, object-oriented programming. What's that? Like, most everybody, as they get experience and as they kind of get more exposure to the code and to kind of what's out there, even in PHP itself, like don't need that really kind of I don't want to say infantile, but I think in a way infantile in relationship to experience. Like this is a variable, this is a property, this is a method, this is a access modifier. It's like let people know what they know and let people use what they know and help them fill in the blanks instead of,
Yeah.
There's kind of like and maybe this wasn't actually written, maybe this is just how I read a lot of these types of articles, but kind of like that everything you know about X is wrong. But I don't know. Those annoy me.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Is that
everything
fair to
you
say?
yeah. I mean, I guess it is. I think that is a valid point. Like that, it's about filling in gaps. It's not about taking it from, zero to something. It's about saying, hey, you probably have some exposure. Like so, understanding your audience when you're doing teaching. So, I think this was mentioned earlier in the channel about, it really like being able to fill in gaps kind of requires an understanding of whoever is teaching understands the level of their students or of people who are trying to learn from them. Like you have to really understand your audience. So in
Yeah.
typical presentation form or
Right.
whatever,
Right.
that's difficult to do. But
Yeah, you can't do it.
well, I mean, you can gauge it to a certain degree. Like yeah, I mean, you can kind
Well,
of
you can't
gauge
gauge
where
it
people are.
beforehand. Like you could be in there and be like, "Oh, this is way, I'm shooting way lower than where everybody is." But
Well, I mean, that's sort of true and sort of. You can gauge it, you can put it in the ballpark, right? Like by looking at other sessions that were accepted. So you're kind of trusting the organizers to understand what their audience is, but assuming that it's a conference that has been going on before, or you're working at a certain, you can kind of that assume a certain level of understanding. Like, for example, if I was writing a talk for ZendCon, I would probably gear it more towards an enterprise type audience, so like problems that
okay,
they might experience. And
well,
then if I
that's
was
like
writing,
your ZenCon's your jam, isn't it? Don't you go
yeah,
like every year?
I do go to. Well, I have gone for like the past, I think, 4 years. I think
As a
I've been
speaker?
speak there, which has been awesome. So I do like ZenCon. It is a nice. It's a good conference. I think everybody should go at least once. But anyway,
I've never gone.
you should go. But
Okay,
there you go.
it's settled.
So I mean, I think you have to gauge things. So I think what my call to action or whatever out of this would be, as a teacher or as someone who's educating in some capacity. So if you're speaking, if you're writing blog posts, if you're mentoring,
Writing auth
anyone
books.
writing OAuth books, avoiding, well, it used to be Beth, because you're not writing articles or whatever.
Yeah, that's you though.
Yeah, I know. But whatever capacity, if you're teaching something, take a little bit of time, and I'm trying to do this myself as well. I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else, but take some time to get material in, or get material together that takes a topic that you've kind of seen a lot of introductory stuff on, or given presentations yourself that kind of talked about introductory level of things, and then put some material out there that's the next step, or maybe a bigger example. So a prime example would be, I know, Matt, you've done a talk on mocking. I've also done a talk on mocking. And there are natural steps after that talk or after that topic. Right? There's natural things that people will ask during the presentation. And
Right.
they're like, well, yes, that, a common one that I used to get, or that I got when I gave the talk was, yeah, that's great. You showed me different types of mocks, how they're useful and everything, but I've got this legacy code, so how do I,
Yeah.
what do I do? Like, how do I get there? And that's kind of the next step. So
You tell
take
them to throw
some
it away
time.
and start over, right?
Yeah, well, obviously, burn it down and write it in Rails is my answer, but see, I've embraced the persona you've given me. You've made everyone think that that's what I do, so I'm just going to do it now.
Well, also the fact that you do it.
I don't. I think only on this podcast, well, of course, whatever, but only on this podcast is the place that I would say you should do something in Rails. Um, yeah, but
The biggest audience that you reach, that's where you
yeah,
start.
that's true. That's the only place that I would tell everyone you should go do it in Rails. Just for the record, you should do it in Rails if you want to. Do it in Laravel if you want to. I don't really care what you write it in. Like, it doesn't matter to me. The important thing is that you're growing as a developer. So do whatever you want to do. Like, you can use, Symfony. You can use Python, Django, whatever. I don't care. Just write some code.
Django Unchained.
Get better. Get better at what you're doing. That's what I care about.
Yes.
More so than the language. Despite all the elephants that I may have. But
the Roy G. Biv of elephants.
But yeah, so my call to action, my challenge is if you have ever developed something, and I think someone who's doing a good job of this is actually in the channel or was in the channel or whatever. Code Rabbi is put up a blog recently, and he's spending some time on topics that I think are good, and he's actually spending the time to write them. And I think that's important to get different levels of content out there. So we have, I think, a lot of coverage of beginner level stuff. So Google unit testing PHP tutorial, and you'll have 8,000 articles that tell you how to install PHP unit. Either some of them are outdated and tell you to use pair, and then a lot of them are going to be like, you just use Composer, and then you can do it globally, or you could do it in your project or whatever. So you've got 8,000 of those articles, and then you've got the advanced stuff that's like, hey, I had this really complex problem, let me go through and show you how it works. I think we need more stuff towards that advanced level that's real world applications of topics as opposed to just the bowling examples over and over and over again. Like those are kind of played out and not helpful, so that's not what people are looking for. So that's my call to action. That's something that I'm personally going to try to get better at, and I hope anyone who creates content in any way is also going to do that.
I'm not gonna.
I know. Well, I didn't expect you to.
No, all my blog posts have been about my feelings and stuff.
Hey, I say that, and then I just wrote a blog post about something that's not even remotely related to tech at all. So it's like totally just a personal thing. So
like Rails?
Yeah, it was about my love of Rails.
A sonnet?
Yeah, I'm going to get a coffee mug that says I Heart Rails, and I'm going to bring it to all these live recordings so I can just hold it up and be like, I love Rails.
I will get you one for Christmas. And I will
everyone.
I will mail it to the country of Texas.
The country of Texas. Not to pay import fees.
I know. I'll stick them with you.
All right. So anyway, let's not talk about mailing me mugs. We can talk about that later. Anything else related to learning that you have that you want to cover?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really so much like how we can do it better or how we're currently doing it well or failing or whatever your opinion of it is. I think I'm going to kind of go back to that instant gratification phrase that we used a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And, I know at times I've fallen into it. I've fallen into, like, I have the expectation of myself that I can pick up something and learn it relatively quickly. Whatever that means, for what I'm doing, depending on how new it is to me. And so there are definitely times where there's something that I'm picking up and I'm just like, I have no experience with this whatsoever, and I have to figure out how to make this work. And, I mean, I guess what I wanted to share here was a little bit more just like encouragement. Like, learning is hard. And like learning new things is hard, and getting your mind around things that it wasn't previously around is hard, and it can be really frustrating and really like if you're a head case like me, like really demoralizing at times, or you can just be like, man, I'm the stupidest programmer ever. I don't know this. I can't believe I didn't learn this really complex, concept in 3.5 hours. Um, so I mean, I guess that's the thing that I would want to challenge the learners, and not so much the teachers in this regard, to just kind of go into your learning journey. It sounds a little dramatic, but
Your
your
learning journey.
your learning. Can I combine them? No. Okay.
No.
Um, and just know, go in there with the expectation that it's going to be hard, and that you're going to have to work hard, and there's going to be times where you're going to beat your head against your desk, until a little blood comes out, and that's okay. Like, it's okay for it to be hard. It's okay for it to be frustrating.
Yeah, bleeding on your keyboard is perfectly cool. No,
maybe don't bash your head against the desk, but there's going to be times where you want to. And so that's what I just would want to encourage people and say, it's hard, like what we do, writing code, creating solutions for complex problems, and
or creating complex solutions for simple problems.
or creating complex solutions for simple problems is really hard. And there's always going to be stuff that you don't know. And if you really have that passion for learning, or if you really want to, gain that passion for learning, you kind of have to understand that it's hard. And I think I know I overestimate myself all the time. Like, I overestimate my skill set and things like that, and so I have this expectation that I'm like this crazy, brilliant, mad scientist of a programmer, and I try to take on things that someone that is actually crazy good could pick up, and I try to pick it up like really quickly, and it's really frustrating. I think you need to set like reasonable goals. Like, just, it's cool to not know things. Like, I mean, you only don't know things until you know them.
That's deep.
And I'm a deep guy. But like, you need to have success in this journey. Right? You need to have small victories and little wins and things that you pick up. And if you start, if you've been writing PHP for a week, and you think you're really good at it and all that stuff, and you want to pick up like Lisp or something, like, just don't pick up little things, get your small victories, and kind of allow those small concepts and ideas, and even language specific things, so that you can write a blog post about how the language not of your choice sucks because it doesn't do that one thing. And kind of gradually learn and go slow, and there's that'd be my encouragement. Go slow, learn stuff, learn it thoroughly. Don't just learn it enough to meet your deadline, but if you have to learn something, try to learn it as thoroughly as you can, so that you have that as part of your arsenal. It's not like you're not always going, I think I did that one time, and I didn't get fired, so yeah, let's try it again. I gotta go find that old code and see exactly what it was, right? Because then you're just kind of copy and pasting.
I'm glad you brought that up, because personally, I know in the past I've done something that was similar to if today I sat down and said, all right, I want to learn, I want to get better at something. So I want to get better at
quantum physics,
database design or something, or I want to learn a new framework. Let's make it easy like that. So I want to get.
I have a couple suggestions if you're interested.
I want to learn a new framework, and so I'm like, all right, cool. So I just pick a random framework, and then at the same time, I'm like, well, I also want to get a Vagrant box set up and kind of learn how to provision. So I'm going to learn Puppet, and then I'm also going to learn unit testing, and then I'm also going to, like, picking 17 different things to try to learn at once is just setting yourself up for failure. So, that's when you're trying to learn something, stick to something that you know, and that's why I think it's, or that's why I try to, in presentations, use examples that are very easy to understand or very common. So, e-commerce is a prime example, which is something I work in all the time, but is also something that even if you've never written your own e-commerce platform, which why haven't you? You should do that tomorrow. Even if you've never done that, you could really understand the interactions and what I talk about when I tell you adding something to your cart and checking out. Like those types of things are very easy to understand. So I think you have to stick with something that you know or can easily understand when you're trying to learn a new concept. So if you were trying to learn adapters or whatever
Mm-hmm.
as a design pattern, maybe you could say, if you work in e-commerce a lot, how would I have redundant payment providers in this e-commerce application? So payment gateways, I need to have 15 different ones or whatever. Like how would I
Right.
go about coding that? So it's a problem space that you understand and know very well. The only thing you're changing is how you write the code internally. So
Right.
this can be useful for switching paradigms even. So I've written this particular small application in an object-oriented style. Now I want to switch to a functional style.
Yeah.
So don't change the problem space, just change the style.
Yeah.
Don't change the language, just change the style, assuming or presuming that the language can do both and do both well. But yes, that is definitely a good point, and that is something that I have fallen victim to in the past is biting off way too much, trying to learn 15 different concepts at once and learning exactly 0 of them.
I fall victim to that like every other week. Because I mean, it is. It's really daunting to like look and like see all the stuff that you don't know, and like all of your friends do it, and I know your mom says like if your friends jumped off a bridge with you, it's like in terms of learning, yes, like I want to be able to have a conversation uh, with Igor where I'm not just listening
Yeah.
and trying to understand what he says. I want to have I want Joel to make like an F sharp joke that I get. Like those crazy F sharp guys. Like yeah, I mean I see people that are doing interesting things and learning new things and it's like, yeah, I want that. I want jokes and conversations but you just can't have it right now. Like you can't have it all. And that's the thing, it's like because the biggest problem with that is when you break off 17 things, like you're either assuming that there's like 87 hours in a day and you only need to sleep for like 5 of them, or you're assuming that you're going to pick up everything you need to know from books, because like the biggest part of really driving the concept home is actually doing it. So if you're trying to learn testing and you're trying to learn a new framework and yeah, maybe there's some crossover between the two, but you're really just kind of making doing what you need to do to kind of test enough for the framework, and in order to really like master something, you really got to drive it home and do it a lot. And that's where I think taking one topic, like if you did it for 2 weeks and you just took one topic and you were just like, all right, I'm gonna read on this topic, I'm gonna write code, I'm gonna talk to people, I'm gonna ask questions, I'm gonna have conversations about this one thing, that you'll find that gets like kind of stored away really nicely, and then it because for me the big thing is like I want to make things second nature. Like I don't just want to understand it, but I want to be able to be like, need some F sharp, bam, there's some F sharp, and not have to like think about it and not have to have like an F sharp cookbook or a, I don't know why I'm going on F sharp, but you know what I mean. And F sharp is whatever you want it to be.
Sounds like you know what you want to learn next, though. F
Yeah,
sharp.
F
It's
sharp.
subconscious. You want to learn it.
Actually, Rails.
You should talk to Joel. He'll hook you up.
I can't understand him, but he's
Okay,
but he's really
so
good at swing copters for what it's worth.
noted. All right, so here's a question
Oh,
that
we have
we have in the
questions.
channel, which if you were live in the channel, you could ask questions too.
Yeah, you
Hint,
could.
hint. Okay, so I try to make myself fascinated when things break and try to suppress feelings of frustration. Anything I can do to put myself into learning mode and start asking why. Like, I think for me anyway, that's I can't tell you like how you would go about putting yourself into the mode of asking why. I think that's something that naturally just comes as you're trying to learn a new concept. So if you're in very familiar territory, like if you're in a very familiar part of your application or whatever, and there's some problem and you're wanting to know like how do you learn from that problem or how do you learn from the mistakes that led up to that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a lot tougher because if you're familiar with something, you subconsciously draw bridges between things quickly, and so it's difficult to apply the concept of asking why. But I think where it comes in a lot is when you're looking at something that you're not as familiar with. So uh, to me, that would be, if I want to know why a particular bug popped up in submission from a front end to a back end API or something, like I would spend my time looking at the front end side because that's something that I'm not as familiar with in my application or whatever. So uh, I think getting into learning mode is something that you just do naturally. Like I think everyone has that, especially in bugs. Like maybe I misunderstand your question, but if you have something that's breaking and you're not understanding why, you're naturally going to ask the questions of, why is this breaking? And that's when I think it's important to put it on yourself instead of your first reaction being to run to a coworker or to Stack Overflow or whatever and say, "Hey, I get this error. Why?" Like you're asking the question. You're just not you're not asking it of yourself. So for me, the big breakthrough came with, you know, forcing myself to answer the questions, like forcing myself to figure out the root causes of things. That's when I started to learn um, to put myself in learning mode all the time. What do you
Is that
got,
how
man?
you ask questions? Parse error. Why?
Well, hey, not yeah. I think a lot of people do that. They say, hey, I tried to use this particular library and I got this bug. Why? Let me go file it in GitHub issues right now. And it's like not understanding why or complaining about it on Twitter or whatever. Like just not really taking the time to understand what the library's doing. And I'm not saying that it's your job to do that, but I think as someone who's curious or as someone who's wanting to learn and expand your horizons, the perfect opportunity to do that is when you have something breaking in a piece of software that is not that familiar to you. So someone
Right.
else's library or whatever. I think that's. Oh, that wasn't even a question. That was a
You just
comment.
answered a comment.
I answered a comment. Way to go.
Well, there's another one in here.
All
Are
right, go
you
for it.
okay? How do you normally limit yourself? I try to learn too much, or take on too much as well. That's a good question because, I mean, yeah, especially I think if you're active in the social arena on IRC, which you obviously are because you asked it there, and Twitter. Um, sorry, that was a silly comment. Yeah, I kind of alluded to before, like you have all this, you see all this stuff and all these cool things that people are doing. I think, um, ultimately for me, I wish I had a better answer than this. Um, for me, it really comes down to like just discipline, like being able to just say, okay, sometimes, whether that discipline is writing out a list of goals or, like actually scheduling when I'm going to learn things. I mean, if you knew, if you'd ever interacted with me, I don't schedule anything. I didn't even know what time this podcast started. Um,
That's
but those
true.
are some suggestions. Um, and so yeah, for me, it's really more just like it's more of a discipline issue, and just being like, okay, I know there's other things that are going on. I know there's other things that I want to learn. But I've kind of committed to doing this. to learning this one thing, and I either need to follow through with that, because like sometimes you can learn something and be like, oh, that's just terrible. This is stupid. I hate this. And I mean, I guess in some cases maybe you should still learn it anyway, but you're only going to learn when you're intrigued and excited and eager to learn. So, I mean, I would say find something that you're really excited about that you can kind of obtain those small victories in. Learn some things, kind of move forward in that space, and just be really disciplined about what you do. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't read blog posts about anything else, but when you're kind of heads down, really kind of in sponge mode, like focus on that one thing and do whatever you need to do to whether it's shutting off Twitter, logging off IRC, scheduling it, whatever you got to do to really focus on that one thing.
I think that's a good answer. For me, maybe I'm the exact opposite of you, Matt. But I
think you are.
I like to organize a lot of things. Like primary example is I actually just put this up, but I have my own personal Kanban board sitting up over to my left, which I put everything that I'm working on, everything in my own backlog, everything that's on deck for the sprint or whatever that I'm supposed to do. I put it all on sticky notes, and I've got it all up there, and I organize it in traditional fashion or whatever. So for me, limiting learning is just taking a process and applying it. So for me, what I would do is set goals and follow principles like I'm not going to say it. Yes, I am. Apply the concepts that you see in Scrum and in Agile to your learning. Like, I'm only saying that just to annoy you, Matt. But, set a goal and say, hey, I want to learn these 5 things. Like, you just sit down for a little bit and, you want to learn something. So you probably have 5 or 6 things that you think, hey, this would be cool to learn. And say, what is prioritize them. So treat it kind of like a project. You create a priority list. You create, here's what I should learn in this particular order, or whatever is my preferred way of learning it. And then set some time limit, which could be short. It could be a couple hours, or it could be longer. It could be a day or a week or whatever to learn something. And then reflect or be retrospective on how you did with learning that thing. And I'm using Agile terms just to make Matt flip out. But
do you lose learning points to
yes, you estimate with learning points. You can use T-shirt sizes though. That's a lot easier for estimation of learning. Small, medium, large. But my point is, set a way to understand a goal and actually set a goal in a time box things, and just if at the end of your time box you say I learned all I needed to learn about that topic, move on to the next one. If you didn't, extend it if that makes sense to you at that point. So apply the same principles that developers apply to workflow in a project to your learning. Like sit there and prioritize it and pick from the priority list. It doesn't have to be the first one all the time, but just constantly think about that. And that way you don't, for me anyway, if I have a list of things, it's easier for me to not get overwhelmed by trying to learn 15 of them, as opposed to if I just say, hey, we'll learn something, and then I start finding myself learning 17 things at once, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah,
so that's me.
I would add to that too, though. Unlike Agile, the purpose of this is to actually get things done.
See, you just had to say something, didn't you?
Well, I had to defend
just
myself.
Let my Agile joke.
I felt attacked.
Yeah. No. Anyway, I think it's perfectly fine to learn in an Agile fashion. That's my opinion. No? You said you wanted some controversy.
Yeah, no, we can I know you're just trolling me, though.
I'm not. I'm being serious. Like I think it's perfectly fine to apply processes that you learn, whether they be agile or not. Like obviously, waterfall isn't going to work very well for learning.
No, doesn't
You
work
can't
very well for
spec out
anything.
you can't spec out a very rigid path to learning something and then
It
do
doesn't
it.
even work that well for water. Anyway,
I don't know what that means.
I don't even.
Um, all right. Anyway, so I think we've done enough learning tonight.
I think so too.
Unless you have, you're good. Okay.
I'm good. Yeah, you're like, please be done.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for checking out the live stream. Anyone who's listening to it afterwards, you should pay attention to our Twitter account _ loosely coupled on Twitter, so you can figure out when the next one of these is going to happen and listen to us live and join us in the channel or the chat room, as I called it earlier. And yeah, so that's it. So that is episode 11, Loosely Coupled Podcast. I learned it good.
Goodly.
Thanks a lot for listening. Oh, goodly. Sorry, I messed up the title. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Later.